Welcome to the show. This is David Yanis here at the NRB 2015, and I have Mr. Mike Heiser. How are you doing, sir?
Very good. Thanks for having me.
Hey, not a problem. Thanks for being patient. He's our last one for the day, and it's not easy being our last one because you kind of get pushed and pushed and pushed, and then your time, well, we keep it within 15 minutes, so right. Guaranteed or it's free. No. Mike's written a book called Supernatural, and look at this. I can do this all day. The Unseen Realm. So anyway, before we jump into this, Mike, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My title is the Scholar in Residence for Logos Bible Software.
Okay.
The publisher for the book, both books actually, is Lexham Press, and that's an imprint of Logos.
Okay.
Logos typically does digital things, but we're now in the hard copy, the book market, as well as the digital. And my background is Hebrew Bible. I have a PhD in Hebrew Bible and Semitic Studies. I taught at a Bible college for roughly 12 years or so, and I still teach as an adjunct with Liberty University, but most of my duties are writing reference content and doing some those kind of things for Logos.
Oh, wow. So how long have you been doing that?
Oh, 10 years. 10 years, yeah. Last September was 10 years.
It's a good portion of your life there.
It is. It is.
Do you like that? Is that something you enjoy?
I do. It's a great academic job. Outside the classroom, it doesn't involve grading papers and things like that. So it's wonderful. Yeah.
That's good. Now tell us what was the idea behind this book?
Well, I've spent most of my academic career focused on, again, what we would call the unseen realm, divine beings, that sort of thing, which most people equate with angels and demons. But there's a much bigger cast of characters in the Bible. And what the goal of the book really is to sort of be able to have people think about the unseen realm the way an ancient Israelite would, or the way a first century Jew would.
All right.
For instance, I like to use the small group Bible study illustration. If we were sitting here in a circle and we're going through a passage, and there's all sorts of really strange passages in the Bible, strange episodes, strange statements, and we're sitting there in the small group study, and it goes around the circle, or what does this mean to you? When you get to the Israelite guy, his answer is going to be a lot different than anyone else in the room, because he comes from another time, another place, just another worldview, the worldview that's 2,000 or more years removed from us. And so I'm trying to convince people that, look, the best way to understand how a biblical writer and their audience initially would have perceived things in Scripture, especially when it comes to the unseen world, is to sort of have that guy in your head. And so that's the aim of the book, to try to get people to read Scripture through ancient eyes when it comes to the world of the supernatural.
Did you have to take a different approach even to yourself studying it?
When you go through graduate school in Hebrew and Semitics, it's sort of beaten into you. There were lots of things it really took about a semester. I had been to seminary, I taught in a Bible college for 5 or 6 years, but when you're deeply ingrained in primary text and they insist that you look at things, again, the way an ancient person would, it took about a semester for me to realize that what most Christians, even seminarians, hear about the unseen realm is just a lot different than what you're going to hear scholars talk about and what you're going to see again in primary texts. So that disconnect really bothered me, because I thought, this is fascinating. I mean, there are a lot of interpretive payoffs in lots of passages. Genesis 6, the Nephilim, the sons of God, the divine beings of Psalm 82. I mean, all sorts of passages. And I thought, well, this is great that I get to listen to this. I get to dig into it. I get to think about my Bible, this way. But what about the pastor? What about the average person in the pew? A lot of our demonology and our angelology really comes from tradition or influential books like Milton's Paradise Lost, and that's not a bad thing, but it's just that there's so much that's missed. And again, it really doesn't help us get the ancient person in our head to be able to look at a passage and I know what that's talking about. I can fit that in my worldview and my cognitive framework, as scholars like to say, and I understand what role that plays in the arc of the biblical story, sort of the supernatural epic story of the Bible, biblical theology. They know what role it plays. They know why it's there, and what it does, to propel certain ideas. And so I wanted to try to make all of that digestible, again, to the pastor and especially to the layperson. Hence the two books.
Did you find a lot of inaccuracies in some of the things that we look at?
I mean, there are a few things that would sort of fit in that category, but most of it is sort of like the difference between your normal, television 30 years ago and HD. It's a question of detail. It's a question of nuancing. I'll give you a few examples. We all know the story of Naaman the leper. Mm-hmm. He comes from Syria, so he's an outsider. He's not an Israelite. His little servant girl that was taken captive said, "Hey, if you're complaining about your leprosy, why don't you go talk to Elisha the prophet? He'll take care of that." So he does, and he gets healed. And if you remember, what does he ask for from Elisha to take back to his home country? It's the oddest thing to ask for, you could think. He asks for dirt.
Yeah.
He says, "Can I fill as much dirt, fill these bags and put them on my mule and take it back?" And he explains why. He says, "I know now that Yahweh is the God of gods, and the one I'm serving ain't it. He just doesn't measure up. So I'd like to take some dirt back, because part of my job is I have to go into the temple of Ramon with my king, and he's kind of old and he leans on me." And so we're not really told what he wanted to do with it, but the sense is that he feels like he has to take some dirt from Israel back with him. Well, why? Because that's holy ground. There's this sense, and there's a whole worldview of the Old Testament that I like to refer to as a cosmic geographical worldview, that the Naaman story obviously partakes in. Tower of Babel, everybody knows that story. They know Genesis 11, that's where the story is. They know the list of nations that are divided in Genesis 10. But what most people sort of miss is Deuteronomy 32, 8, and 9, where it says that when the Most High divided up the nations, again, we know when that happened, he divided them up according to the number of the sons of God. Okay, that's an ESV rendering that uses the Dead Sea Scrolls in that passage. And it says, "But Israel is Yahweh's portion. Jacob is his allotted inheritance." And what the passage means is that what God did at Babel was a judgment against the people of the world, the nations of the world. I'm no longer going to treat you as though you're my family. I'm going to disinherit you. It's kind of like the Romans 1 event of the Old Testament, where God sort of gives them what they want. You don't want to listen to me after the flood. I told you to disperse, and now you want to do this thing with the Tower of Babel. Fine, I'm going to give you what you asked for. You can have some other god. Now, it's the Old Testament rationale for why there are other gods. And it frames the rest of the Old Testament, that those gods have the nations under their dominion. Mm-hmm. And Israel is Yahweh's portion. So when David gets kicked, when he's fleeing from Saul and he gets kicked out of Judah, and they say, go pray to another god, he's like, what am I going to do? Because I'm not in Judah anymore. I don't know what to do. And he's not denying God is omnipresent, but he feels that to worship, I need to properly be in his domain. Mm-hmm. And then you have the Naaman story. It carries into the New Testament. This is why Paul very rarely uses the word demon, maybe 3 or 4 times in Corinthians. Most of his vocabulary is things like thrones, principalities, powers, dominions, authorities. They're all geographical rulership terms, because he inherits this notion of all the other nations are under dominion, and it's my job as the apostle of the Gentiles to reclaim them. Yeah. Because when God called Abraham right after the Babel incident, he disinherits the nations, and then he says, "Now watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to call this one guy and his wife who can't have children, and I'm going to raise up a people of my own. I'm going to start over, and it's through them that all the other nations will eventually be blessed." And that's the story that frames the whole Old Testament, and on into the New Testament. Israel against the nations, Yahweh against the gods, and it's a supernatural worldview that informs so much. When Jesus goes to certain places, and what he says when he's there, those places have a history. Like I can't say the word Las Vegas without people thinking of gambling or other vices. Yeah. Well, there were places in the Old Testament that had a history, that had a reputation, that people associated certain ideas with them. When Jesus goes to Caesarea Philippi and says, "Thou art Peter, upon this rock I will build my church." Christians love to argue, well, is Peter the rock, or is it Peter's faith? Or hey, the rock is where they're standing. That was a cult center to Zeus in that day. Before that, it was a cult center to Baal in the Old Testament. It's in the region of a place called Bashan, which is the homeland of the last vestiges of the Rephaim during the Moses and Joshua era. And in external texts, ancient texts that aren't in the Bible but are Canaanite literature, there are two places in that region that are also mentioned in the Bible, Ashtaroth and Edrei, that are called the gates of hell. That was the realm of the dead. And so Jesus, when he goes there and says, look, my church, is going to be built starting right here with these guys, and there's nothing that the realm of the dead, the gates of hell, they are not going to be able to withstand it. I'm going to make Satan, and I'm going to make the realm of the dead Satan's tomb before this is all over. And so he goes and he says these provocative things. But we miss that because we don't, again, have that frame of reference for those
where they're
places.
at and what they're doing.
We don't have a
amazing.
sense of that. And there's so much in Scripture like that I want to be able to sort of, again, make it digestible for...
So is the first book of several, or just the only book?
The Unseen Realm,
Okay.
you can flip it over, is aimed at pastors, sort of ministry professionals, people who might have been to seminary, or lay people that really have a lot of experience in Bible study. And then Supernatural is a much smaller version that has the core ideas of the big one, of the one aimed at your pastor.
Oh, wow. Tell them how they can get your book.
Well, it's going to be out in May. We'll announce that on our site, Lexham Press, or, of course, on Amazon. But I think people are going to be fascinated by it, and they're going to get a lot out of it. It's really going to help them understand a lot of passages in Scripture.
Awesome. Mike, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right, and let them know any websites, any social media you want to share. You can do that as well.
Well, you can keep up with the books going to lexham.org. The parent company, of course, is Logos, so logos.com, logos.com. You can search for the book and you'll wind up on a Lexham page. My own site is drmsh.com. That's doctor and then my initials.com. So any one of those places you can keep up with the progress of the book, and I'll announce it when it's live.
Oh, absolutely. God bless you again, man. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
And we'll be back with another great guest.